All right, let's take a look at the second French conflict that we're going to talk about in North America, okay? So this specific conflict that we're talking about is called Queen Anne's War. So Queen Anne's War happened from 1702 to 1713, okay? So if you remember the Beaver Wars ended with the Great Peace of Montreal in 1701. And then in 1702, Queen Anne's War began. So it was pretty much back-to-back wars, okay? And right here we have a picture of Port Royal, okay? So this is the French city and fort or settlement in Acadia. Okay, this was like their main base in Acadia at this time. Okay, Fort Louisbourg is just a fort. Okay, but Port Royal is like the capital city of Acadia. Okay, and this place is relevant to this war, and you'll find out why. So who was involved? We have New France with their allies, the Spanish this time, and various indigenous allies, okay? They had lots of different groups that were joined up with them this time. And they were versus the British colonies in North America. And the British colonies, their main ally were the Haudenosaunee. They had a few other little groups of indigenous allies here and there, but mostly it was just the Haudenosaunee as their allies in North America specifically. Okay? So where did this happen? Okay, the Queen Anne's War happened in North America. Okay, it was the battle between the groups we just talked about, the French and Spanish and their allies, versus the British and the Haudenosaunee. So we can see here on this map, okay, we have Port Royal right here in Acadia that I said is very important for this battle. Okay, then we have the British territories here in red, the Spanish territories in orange, and these purple territories are the lands that end up going to the British at the end of this war. So at the beginning of this war, these lands were French, or they had some sort of French presence, or they were contested, which means the French and the British were arguing who owns what. Okay, we know that the French owned Nova Scotia before this war, and after the war, the British got control of it because it's purple. All right, so that's why Port Royal is important for this particular story or war, because it gets captured. Spoiler alert. Okay, so this is where it's happening. It's happening in North America, the colonies in North America. Okay, so what was going on? What was going on? So Queen Anne's War was the counterpart of the War of Spanish Succession in Europe. Ah, okay, so there was a war going on in Europe called the War of Spanish Succession. All right, that war ended up dragging the colonies into conflict too, but we call the colonial conflict part Queen Anne's War. So during Queen Anne's War, the British American colonial settlements, like the 13 colonies, along the New York and New England borders with New France, okay, so the ones that were just touching New France. So we have the British American colonies, and they're touching the French colonies, okay. So along that border, okay, there was a bunch of raids by the French forces along with their indigenous allies. So the French and their indigenous allies would run down across the border, burn towns, attack people, take prisoners, and then go back into their land. Okay, that's what a raid is. So there's a bunch of raids that happened along the border. In response to the raids, the British they gathered up a large force, and they sailed and conquered Port Royal in 1710. Okay, so the French were doing little raids against little villages across the border. The British decided to get a big army, and they attacked and conquered Port Royal in 1710. Okay, the result of this was that the French lands called Acadia became the British province of Nova Scotia because they conquered it in a battle. After the war ended, okay, there was a peace treaty that was signed. So under the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713, that's the peace treaty, Britain also gained complete control of Newfoundland and the Hudson Bay region from France. Okay, so there was a big battle in Europe. That battle spilled over into North America. The French and their indigenous allies raided a whole bunch. The British were like, what? That's not cool. Let's invade Port Royal. So they took over Port Royal, the capital city of Acadia. And after that war ended, the French lost, the British won. And the British got control of Acadia, which they called Nova Scotia now. They got Newfoundland and the Hudson Bay region. So that's what happened. So why did this war happen? What were the main causes? The first main cause was imperialism, okay? European nations wanted to continue growing their empires and colonies, resulting in more and more conflicts breaking out. Mercantilism. European nations wanted to increase the profits of their colonies while making sure they thwarted or stopped their enemies' economies. Okay, they wanted to be number one. And politics. So for Queen Anne's War, a monarchical succession crisis, that means monarchical means like monarchy, the kings and queens. Succession crisis means that there was conflict between who gets to be the next king. Okay, so a monarchical succession crisis in Europe upset the balance of power there. Okay, France was going to get a whole lot of power and the British didn't like that. So this sparked a major war called the War of Spanish Succession. And because of that war in Europe, the North American colonies got dragged into conflict as well. So why is this so important? Okay. So what were the effects of Queen Anne's War? Well, the main effect was the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713. So after the war ended, when Queen Anne's War ended, after the British captured Port Royal, okay, this resulted in the Treaty of Utrecht, which moved the French claims to the territories of Acadia, Hudson Bay, and Newfoundland to the British. Unfortunately, the treaty left out the indigenous nations, okay? They were ignored by the British, which caused them to dislike the British even more and spark future conflicts over the territory. Okay, so let's take a look at this map, and we can really see the impact of Queen Anne's War and why it's important, the effect. We have the map on the left, which was before 1700. Okay, remember this war of Queen Anne's War started in 1701, or 1702, I believe. Okay, so this is what it looked like before. Okay, where we have Hudson Bay and Acadia, all controlled by the French, and Newfoundland is half controlled by the French. After the war in 1713, we have Nova Scotia now belongs to the British, Hudson Bay now belongs to the British, and all of Newfoundland belongs to the British. Okay, and there are zones of conflict where people argue they own. Okay, so that was the main cause, or the main effect, I should say, the main effect of the war. So how did Queen Anne's War contribute to Canada? Okay, the British taking control of Nova Scotia gave them a significant advantage in North America. Their acquisition, their gaining of the land, allowed them to build the fort/city of Halifax. Okay, because Port Royal got kind of trashed during the war, so the British built their own fort city called Halifax. But it also caused the French Acadians, who still lived there, and the Mi'kmaq to hate their British masters. Okay, these British guys just show up, start building a fort. Okay, they're speaking English. The French and the Mi'kmaq were getting along for a long time. Okay, and now all of a sudden the British are showing up and they're putting bounties on the Mi'kmaq. They're being disruptive to the French. Okay. Also, since the British got control of Hudson's Bay, they gained a huge advantage in the fur trade. Okay, so let's do some review questions. So who was the main opponent of New France during Queen Anne's War? What was the main reason for Queen Anne's War? When did Queen Anne's War end? Where was Queen Anne's War? Where did it happen? Why was Queen Anne's War caused? What caused it to happen? The important effects of Queen Anne's War are what? What were the important effects of the war? And how did Queen Anne's War contribute to Canada? All right, the next war that we're going to talk about for French conflicts in North America, the third one that we're going to talk about, the last one, will be the 7 Years' War.